Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving straight into a totally fascinating, highly complex, and continuously evolving geopolitical puzzle. We're going to impartially unpack the global shadow war executed by Iran since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Relying entirely on the facts, data, and intelligence reports from our sources, we're going to figure out exactly how this playbook operates on a global scale.
Okay, let's dive into this. What on earth could possibly connect a violent Swedish street gang, a notorious Mexican drug cartel, and a global superpower? I know, it literally sounds like the plot of a Hollywood spy thriller, right? But it's actually the bizarre reality of modern international security. This completely unusual juxtaposition perfectly sets up what we're examining today, a highly unconventional strategy of state-sponsored external operations.
So, here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the revolution's global mandate. Second, outsourcing to criminal proxies. Third, targeting dissidents and officials. Fourth, the truly global footprint. And finally, the international security response. All right, starting with Section 1, the revolution's global mandate. Exporting ideology.
To really understand the present, we actually have to rewind a bit and look at the Iranian constitution itself. It explicitly states that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, isn't just tasked with protecting the regime at home. No, they have a mandate to actively export and spread the Islamic Revolution worldwide. So this isn't some secret hidden agenda, It's literally their publicly stated foundational mission.
Now, what's really interesting here is how this mandate actually gets put into practice. It's driven by a religious and political doctrine called Velayat-e-Faqih, or the guardianship of the jurist. Basically, the goal is to shift the regional status quo by pushing back against Western influence and propping up global Shia movements. And the tip of the spear executing this abroad? Well, that's a highly secretive branch of the IRGC Quds Force known as Unit 840.
Moving into Section 2, outsourcing to criminal proxies, the modern methodology.
Over the years, we've seen a massive tactical pivot in how this global mandate is actually carried out. Back in the day, state-sponsored IRGC operatives usually took direct action themselves. But today, the whole methodology has shifted heavily toward outsourcing the violence. Think about it. Instead of risking sending an intelligence officer across a hostile border, the regime is literally just hiring local drug dealers, biker gangs, and syndicate leaders to do the groundwork for them.
And this outsourcing looks terrifyingly different depending on where you are in the world. For instance, in Sweden, they've used the Foxtrot network to target Israeli and Jewish sites. And get this, they're actively recruiting minors because Swedish law basically prevents prosecuting anyone under 15. It's wild. Over in Germany, they tapped the Hells Angels biker gang for synagogue attacks back in 2021. And in Latin America, Hezbollah leverages the tri-border area for drug and arms smuggling, which historically culminated in that absolutely devastating 1994 AMIA bombing in Argentina.
But why do this? Well, the crucial point here really comes down to two words: plausible deniability. I mean, think about it. If a local gang member gets caught throwing a Molotov cocktail, it immediately just looks like a local domestic crime issue, right? It doesn't instantly look like international state-sponsored aggression. It gives the regime a highly effective, deniable buffer.
Section 3. Targeting dissidents and officials. Who is exactly in the crosshairs?
Let's see how this builds, because the escalation on U.S. soil is pretty alarming. Back in 2011, there was a plot to bomb a popular D.C. restaurant just to assassinate the Saudi ambassador. Fast forward to 2021, and we see this elaborate scheme to kidnap U.S. journalist Masih Alinejad and literally whisk her away to Venezuela on a speedboat. By 2022, the targets expanded to former high-ranking officials like Mike Pompeo. And in 2024, we're talking assassination plots against dissidents, involving operatives like Farhad Shakri in targeting figures all the way up to Donald Trump. The audacity of these operations is just skyrocketing right alongside the profile of the targets.
Over in Europe, these crosshairs frequently lock onto journalists and regime critics. In the UK, there was a 2022 operation ominously dubbed The Wedding that plotted to assassinate 2 Iran international journalists. And just in 2024, journalist Pouria Zerati was brutally stabbed right outside his London home. But this campaign isn't actually new. It stretches back decades. We're talking about the 1991 assassination of a former prime minister in France, all the way to a 2023 arson attack on an opposition media center near Paris. The chilling takeaway here? For these dissidents, simply crossing an international border absolutely does not guarantee your safety.
Section 4. A truly global footprint. Operations across continents.
Because, as you'll see, this shadow war reaches way beyond just the Middle East or the West. Down in Latin America, intelligence sources have documented unregistered ghost flights running between Venezuela and Iran, specifically designed to completely bypass official records. Over in Africa, the IRGC has funded armed groups in the Central African Republic and plotted against embassies in Ethiopia. And then in Oceania, specifically Australia, we're seeing this really modern low-cost evolution. They're actually using the Telegram app to recruit local informants, paying them in cryptocurrency to surveil Jewish communities. It's incredibly modern and incredibly sneaky.
$1.5 million. That is a staggering bounty offered back in 2011 by an Iranian-American intermediary to members of the Mexican Los Zetas cartel. The job? To bomb that Washington, D.C. restaurant we mentioned earlier to kill the Saudi ambassador. But here's the twist. The cartel members he approached were actually DEA informants. So the plot, which would have caused massive civilian casualties, was thankfully thwarted. But to put that into perspective, that number puts a very real, very concrete price tag on exactly how much the regime is willing to shell out to outsource an assassination.
And we can't forget that these physical operations are heavily backed up by digital ones. Intelligence agencies have actively tracked the shutdown of Iran-linked bot networks during domestic internet blackouts. But honestly, what's perhaps even more alarming are the warnings from U.S. security experts about sleeper cells. We're talking about agents who train abroad, slip into a country covertly, and essentially just wait. They're waiting for a global political trigger to execute attacks, potentially even utilizing off-the-shelf technology like drones.
Section 5. The International Security Response, Pushing Back. So, how exactly is the rest of the world reacting to all this? Well, this brilliantly illustrates how British intelligence, specifically MI5, views Iran's overarching strategy. They see it as a highly calculated three-step process. First, you launch high-volume, low-cost, deniable plots. Second, you exhaust and completely overwhelm local police and counterterrorism resources. And third, you create such a profound, constant security crisis that you essentially force nations into political negotiations. The really chilling reality here is that for the regime, it's not even always about a successful attack. It's just about causing systemic exhaustion.
But the international community definitely isn't ignoring this. Just recently, 14 countries, including the US, the UK, France, and several NATO members, issued a joint formal condemnation. And they didn't mince words. It was highly specific, explicitly calling out Iran's intelligence threats and its ongoing coordinated plots to, and I quote, kill, kidnap, and harass citizens globally.
And we are seeing concrete countermeasures being deployed right now. MI5 reports that they've thwarted over 20 plots in the UK alone just since 2022. Over in Germany, the Domestic Intelligence Agency actually had to launch a dedicated 24/7 hotline just to handle the massive spike in harassment reports from Iranian exiles. Across the EU, there are major legislative pushes happening to officially designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization. Plus, heavy financial sanctions are cutting off the money, and that means hitting not just Iranian oil magnates, but directly sanctioning the proxy criminals themselves, like Sweden's Foxtrot gang.
So I want to leave you with one final provocative thought today. When state-sponsored operations increasingly hide behind local drug dealers, biker gangs, and teenagers recruited on Telegram, are our traditional borders even relevant to national security anymore? It's a massive puzzle that literally every intelligence agency is grappling with right now. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep studying the facts and keep questioning how global security is evolving.